Hi, I'm Keegan. This is a bunch of gamers. Welcome back to GM Talks as we're back on politics, which, depending on when this comes out, may be worse or extremely worse than the current zeitgeist. But I'm joined by Corbin from Awkward GM. Corbin, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on here.
I understand that you almost did the welcome as a reflex, since
Oh
you're the one
God, yeah.
usually doing the interviews.
Oh yeah. I haven't done any in a while. I'm hoping to get some when time permits.
For sure, I,
But
I
yeah,
understand.
I'm the type of person who will say you too when someone says how's your food or
Oh,
something. So it was
yeah.
like,
For sure, but you've done a lot of Onyx Path games and things like that, and you've done various games, and we're trying to approach this as a topic of how to run political games. How do your politics affect your games? What do you think of politics in the tabletop realm? And since you do a lot of stuff online, I was wondering how that might affect how you approach the topic of politics in games.
it's so it really depends on with things how you come at it, because if you're coming at it from, like, for online space, I don't see much of a difference between doing politics online versus in person, because in person, if you got like a hierarchy of, like, kings, queens, gang lords, or mobsters, if you're doing modern, uh you're not really going to do anything too different, at least from my perspective. I Maybe there's something that, as we discuss, it'll come to mind, but
Sure.
I have a lot of notes. I keep Excel spreadsheets of the various people in my games for stuff like Onyx Path. I'll have, like, which faction this person is a part of, and for something like, say, Changeling the Lost, what, like, that faction would be their court for their, and then also they would have their, like, changeling type. There's, which could be something like beastkin. I think it's like there's beast, wizened, and like ogre and stuff like that. So I would have all those written down. And one of the things I think people should probably have when it comes to, like, factions is maybe something along the lines of aspirations, similar to player characters. I usually, for myself, will have the leader of a faction have two short-term, one long-term aspiration, just like in Onyx Path games, just like in Curseborn or Chronicles of Darkness, and that way I can sort of gauge what they're likely to do in a given situation. For instance, if their major goal is to take over a city and be the ruler from the shadows, as it were, they're going to they're going to give missions to players being like, hey, I hear you can get shit done. Oh, can I swear? I can.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But so yeah, so you can get, like, the players can get shit done. We'll give them missions to help us, like, take over the city or something like that, and the players can decide whether that person's someone they want to be working for or take down. In some cases, I
Okay. Um, I think that that is a good choice for running politics in games. Like political factions in games. I think one of the things I like to think about and definitely try and do, because I do like very narratively focused games. So this part happens more in the simulationist style games I'll sometimes run, where I try and create a more realistic world. But think about the contradictions in a political ideology that are strengthened by those aspirations, and that because there's always a kind of contradiction in those kinds of ideologies that you can see, that creates the cognitive dissonance in people who follow them, that creates kind of a backlash effect.
Yeah, like, so when you mean contradiction, so like the
So
hypocrisy
yeah,
or
you not
something,
quite a
like.
hypocrisy. Like I'm gonna have to go into more of my commie bag of readings, but a an example would be, if you're familiar with Slavoj Žižek, um, okay,
I'm not.
philosopher and all that, but he does a lot of stuff about the philosophy of ideologies, and he uses an example of anti-Semitism in that the anti-Semite doesn't actually like has nothing to do with like Jewish people. It has everything to do with a constructed ideology of Jewishness to create this zipper that zips up contradicting ideals, such as strong, Aryan, blah blah blah. But it is constantly under attack and in danger. So they
Mm-hmm.
have crafted this view, this the image of what they claim a Jewish person is, to zip
Oh,
up those two contradictory ideas within their ideology and use that. And that's the most extreme example, but that's the one that immediately jumps to my mind.
that brings to mind for me, there's often this, like, people don't like to think that they are the ones in charge often. They want to think that they're the rebels against everything else, and that's where you get those Star Wars stories where someone who is, no matter what perspective you have in politics in real life, you watch Star Wars, you're 99% of the time you're rooting for the rebels to win and identify with the rebels, is usually the case. I will say there are some people who may not, and I'm not going to delve too deeply into that.
No, outside the
I
scope of this.
Yeah, there is a bit of, for me, when it comes to creating factions specifically, I do kind of like to mix and match some elements from real political doctrine. I would say, well, political doctrine, I'm not an expert in politics other outside of games, but
Sure,
like,
sure.
for instance, if you boil down some political parties to what they say they are, you have stuff that are like, we're for the rights of the individual over the rights of the group, or vice versa. You have, we are looking to the future, whereas other people are like, we need to go back to the past or be in a form of stagnation because this is how things were when we were born or when we were alive, and we want to keep it that way. I would say if you were to look at something like Vampire the Masquerade, the Camarilla is really that stagnation part. Like, they don't want to progress vampire society outside of that feudal system that they have. So much so that if you bring in some of the lore from V5, I think specifically, they ban technology because they
Yeah,
just don't know how to deal with it.
exactly. And I think, and that's kind of where I think that's kind of important, and that's kind of the core to this, right? Is when we talk about politics and games, most people, a way to make sure that you do create interesting politics in games is to examine your own politics, and specifically, your readings of other people's political leanings, theories, and praxis. And so that becomes a thing where you can challenge things of your own ideas and things like that to create problems, things like that. And I think it creates a deeper experience, but also it does mean that no matter where you go, and everyone who's come on here has kind of said it, you can't really escape it. A game doesn't
Mhm.
feel political simply because everyone agrees with the politics that are being presented at the table.
Yeah, that is, I agree to that as well. Like, you need to have a bit of nuance. Like, there is nuance in different factions for different reasons. Each one, at the very least, should believe that they're trying to be the good guy. Something I've been trying to better understand is like how you can mix and match the politics of reality with a politics of fantasy in a way that, like, yeah, you can have a group who seem like they're the progressive type people, but then you find out, oh, they're actually for the stagnation of society. It just looks progressive from our viewpoint because of XYZ thing.
Sure.
Case in point, to give a better example, I ran a Chronicles of Darkness, like, West Marches style game. I called it an open city style game, and I have a video on my YouTube channel, Awkward GM Corbin, where you can watch that. But basically, the idea was we had a player who made a character that was it was Vampire the Requiem, so it was the Invictus, I believe, who are the like typically they're the group that is kind of your more conservative vampires.
Yeah, those are the ones who believe in Longinus, correct? I think that's the one.
No, that's like seeing
Yo, you're right.
Sanctum, I think.
No, you're
Yeah,
right.
they're
Yeah, no, I'm getting mixed up. It's been a while.
yeah, Invictus I would say are pretty close to the Camarilla in
Got it.
Vampire the Masquerade. They're like old money vampires, usually from Europe and stuff like that. But
Got it.
their counterpoint is usually the Carthians, and the Carthians are sort of like your anarchs. So when we were playing the game, this player, their character was a pop star who was very like in the public eye and all this stuff, and promoting the idea of getting all the supernatural beings together in sort of like a federal government of supernatural beings, or at least an alliance.
Interesting.
And then when I had to come up with a antagonist faction for this group, the well, because the player character became Prince of the City, but that's an entirely another story. The I chose the Carthians, and their whole thing was we're vampires. We should be able to be self-sufficient, independent, and not have to rely on dealing with other creatures that are seen as inferior. Now, some people will say to me, Corbin, you got the Carthians wrong, but I would say, well, it's just your perspective in the long run because you have such a charismatic person who's taken up leadership in the Invictus that they managed to introduce this concept in a way that the Invictus actually approved of. And then the Carthians, just to be anti-Invictus, took up the oppositional sense because suddenly the political ground was shaken up. And this is something you see in real life with some political parties taking on solid stances on certain social issues, leading to the other political party, in order to get more followers, taking the opposite approach.
Yeah, yeah, the wedge issue of way. That's no, that's actually that's a brilliant way to do that for Vampire. Actually, is using supernatural wedge issues.
I mean, everyone wants to make sure that their territory is protected, and one of the things, even in a fantasy game, it doesn't even have to be an urban fantasy game, or even if you're doing a modern game to an extent or a sci-fi game, people want to be safe. And so long as you can guarantee that through alliances, through backroom deals, you have these issues that'll come up just from that alone, and you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, and there's such a breadth of actual, very strange real life politics to draw from in not just urban fantasy, but fantasy. Similar, I spoke to Dixie last week or the week before, and we were talking about Monster Kingdoms, and she described the human faction as basically, or I came to the conclusion that they're the weird internet stoics. They're the people who like go, yes, everyone has to suffer and then they'll become better. So we're going to make everyone's lives around us way harder than they need to be so that they can learn stoicism
That is
and become
so
better
terrible.
people and become better
I,
people because of it.
I am so happy that I'm not a fan of fantasy usually. Like
Sure.
I'm very much I have trouble with like getting into those worlds, but I really like the dark area that Monster Kingdoms has come to. And
Sure.
I'm like, how could they do this in this time? Like the stuff that's in there is kind of crazy.
Yeah. No, it's very cool, and I think that's a good example of you creating a villainous political faction, and in some ways really drawing from real world politics without having to dive into the well, they're obviously fascists, as
Oh,
Dixie put it, because that's been kind of done to death, and it's
yeah.
maybe a little close to the chest,
It
and
can be.
but like for my example, for me, like in back to the original thing about how you do it maybe in person versus recording is I do a lot of Werewolf the Apocalypse, obviously, and one of the games I have run before and I'd like to run again in person, but I cannot do for an audience is you replace all the Pentex subsidiaries with real world companies. You don't tell
Yes.
them who, you don't tell them which is which, and then you are able to kind of draw on the news a bit more, I feel, because
Oh yeah.
what I don't do for drawing from the news, if, for especially for the recorded game, despite how it looks on occasion by accident, is you you draw from. I don't want it to look like I'm profiting off of people's suffering in the news, even
Yeah.
if it's just for an audience. But with players and it's just you and your friends, then it becomes a little more safe to really kind of dive into those very real sort of corporate things, and then you add monsters in it, right, to at least make it fun.
Yeah. I apologize because earlier when you were saying in person versus online, I didn't realize you meant streaming
Oh yeah,
versus
and
a home game.
yes, no, and I should have been more clear, and I or just recorded like in my case, because I probably won't stream. There's just no joy in in streaming it directly. I like to cut out the table talk and some of the rule questions that come up more than one session in a row.
I can I can hear I understand that. I got into so to go into that personal versus streamed game for a second. I did run a Changeling the Lost game for quite a long time. I think for about a year during COVID. And what I ended up doing with that, because I had so many people who wanted to play but couldn't make the time to do it, I selected 4 players to be the heads of state for the 4 factions that you have in Changeling. You have the 4 courts: spring, autumn, winter, and summer. And each one of them, I gave them like decisions to make during the course of the game as to like what they wanted to do with their court, who's taking over power at the moment, what do you want to do. It did fall apart at one point because a bunch of them had a lot of real world stuff going on, but they were all very antagonistic to each other because they all I had told them in Changing the Lost you have the crown, and whoever has the crown is the leader of that season for that time, and passing the crown around is what keeps everyone safe. But they were still all like, what if there weren't other monarchs around and I just kept the crown? And I'm like, well, you would be putting everyone at risk. And they said, but I'd still have the crown, right? It was very crazy.
That's pretty good. Uh, no, I like
Is
that too. It's actually for me personally, I tried to do a lot more blue booking with this werewolf game that I've been posting, and even recording side sessions and things like that. And then I found with the recording and the editing, because I do all of it, I found myself burning out, and so that had to take a back seat. And it's way more fun for a personal game to have like a blue book session where someone writes a few lines on what might be happening in downtime, and then I can use that as a springboard for the main group's adventure or something like that.
Mm, I have not. I don't think I've done that. I did have people do play by post for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and that had some interesting implications. But for me, I think if I were doing games online, like for an audience, it does. There is a lot of stuff I do tend to worry about because I do. I in real life I am pretty political, and there are times where I had a game recently where I had to I was playing it, I was trying to explain something with a real world analogy. I was like, "Oh God, I need to like I'm streaming right now. I need to say like the all opinions here are not the
Yeah.
opinions of the people who own the channel." And it was because I was trying to explain to someone how in Curseborn there's a council of various families who are there to protect each other. And I said, it's like NATO. And I made reference to the drone attack that
Oh,
happened in Poland recently, and because it's like it feels like sometimes, and I don't think it's a bad thing for me to have said, but it's just something I'm like, I don't know how much you want to bring real world stuff into this, but it was
sure.
like they get a country gets attacked by another country, and then they have to decide whether it's worth retaliating. If no one dies, if there's very little like damage that is done that could be recovered from, is it worth potentially going to war with another larger country, or bringing however many allies in your group together in your defense pact to go against them? Because you're not just putting the lives of like a small amount of people at stake here. You're putting the lives of civilians at stake, and you have to make that call. You have these moral quandaries that no one should ever have to make.
Yeah. No, and that's pretty pretty mild to some of the political commentary that has come out from me and some of the people who've come on here. So you're fine to express your
Yeah.
opinions but no, because I've
I
made uh, biting, I guess, satirical jokes now for Werewolf that may have crossed the line, but I do feel that they punched up at least.
yeah. Yeah, it's weird though, because sometimes I'll it's not that I'm punching up or punching down. It's
Sure,
that I'm my mind goes to a historical sense, even though
sure,
it's a present day thing.
sure.
So I apologize if I offend anyone.
No, that's
I just
yeah. No, that makes sense, and I think yes, especially with pulling inspiration from real world politics and real events, right? From streaming or recording a game and things like that, you do have to take some precautions, right? Because you don't want to misrepresent either someone's culture or you don't want to misrepresent a political ideal or put put something out in the world that you can't put back, especially as your
yeah.
audience grows and things like that.
Yeah, there's I tend to agree that there's a lot of stuff from previous generations that or previous decades that doesn't really hold up to a modern sensibility, and it's not just like political correctness or wokeness or anything like that. It's also just like the vibes of it.
Yeah.
Like a slasher movie in the 80s hit differently than watching a slasher movie in 2020 or something. Like
Yeah, exactly.
there are trends, there are differences, there's ways of tackling tougher subjects in the modern day than there are uh, when we did them initially. I'm a big fan of Dark Sun, and that is a setting that is very difficult to bring into a modern day sensibility, especially with um, stuff that, as I've talked, there's some stuff that is very present in that, like the idea of slavery
Mm-hmm.
in the setting that it's like, okay, I know that's in there, I can put it as a trigger warning, but then there's stuff that I didn't even realize until I was talking to people that that's in there. Like there are depictions of the city states in there, the political city states that they have are based off of real world cultures. And this was around a time which I would call sort of like 90s racism, where it's like they were trying to be inclusive, but they didn't know anything about the culture and kind of
Mm-hmm.
made a stereotype of it.
Yeah.
And then you have stuff about like indigenous populations, where the halflings in Dark Sun are cannibals. And it's kind of like a joke, oh, cannibalistic halflings. But then you think about it and you're like, oh, the artwork for the halflings is very indigenous coded.
Yeah.
And they live in the jungles and the only forests. And you have to be careful with that. Like,
Yeah.
because, and this is me getting on a high horse. Please stop me.
Oh, you're
No,
fine. The
it's yeah, it's there the one thing that I kind of am upset with in regards to like specifically Tolkien fantasy, and I think I've talked to a bunch of people about this and they've said Tolkien had a problem with this too later in life, was that the evil races, the orcs, the goblins, were caricatures.
mm-hmm.
They had no depth. And sometimes I feel with Dungeons and Dragons, it reinforced that a lot for some
I
people.
I would say going back to the original source material, right? Tolkien, I would argue that Tolkien gave his orcs and goblins more depth than what the original D&D did for them. Because there's a whole part where Sam's sneaking in to save Frodo, and there are these orcs who are like, "Man, I really don't want to go to war. I just am not a fan." Basically, they're still being orcs, right? But they're like, death is kind of scary and things like that. And Tolkien wrote in letters like, "Hey, creating an irredeemable race is just kind of like not good." And basically, he like retroactively said orcs can make it to elf heaven and things like that. But yeah, I would say Gary Gygax because I made the statement to a couple people that I don't actually believe D&D is a medieval fantasy. I
Mhm.
believe D&D is a Western dressed up as a medieval fantasy because you have those tropes of the
Oh yeah.
savages outside the borders of civilization as people go off to explore ancient lands and things like that.
Oh yeah. I can definitely see that. I've in another comparison of like sort of an interesting way writing has progressed for some of these like fantasy based games is I would say I Warhammer 40K. Do you read any of the
I
books or
I
anything?
am not a huge fan. I'll admit.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short and sweet and to the point. So for Warhammer 40K, there are a bunch of books that are known to be like the best books that have come across the game. The one that came to mind for me was Hell's Reach, which is about humans, space marines versus orcs. And orcs are like fantasy orcs but in space. And the depiction of them in that book was so terrible. It was the orcs were a faceless enemy that were attacking for a reason that only like got explained through exposition, and you never saw orcs do anything for 40K fans that was orky, like having weird weapons or having slapstick dark humor with killing people. And then recently, they started coming out with new orc books, like novels from the orc perspective, as well as an entire series. And from there, like they really made it feel like they're fleshed out. There was a book I read where they had a Space Marine scout having a duel with a commando, and they were nemesis throughout the book. And I was like, where was this 20 years ago? Well, they were too busy being like, "Oh, no one wants to know about the enemies that we're killing. They're just faceless enemies that we need to get the bolter porn out or whatever."
Yeah, no, and that's true. And I think that evolution is good because there is some. I don't know if you've ever actually read the original AD&D Player's Handbook.
No, I
Uh,
have not.
ooh, there is interesting stuff in it's the same kind of issues that there's interesting stuff in there. There's a thought process behind there that is interesting, but it is also filled with a metric ton of racism. Uh, and it's kind of like the problem where I like pre-genre fantasy. I do find it very interesting to see how fantasy was before it kind of got codified by Tolkien
Oh yeah, I
and
can
Moorcock
understand
to
that.
some degree, because Moorcock is the other half of that coin in what shaped fantasy of today. But you do have to like go. When you read it, you have to really discern. I really like this book, but I understand why this idea is bad. If I'm going to use this in my game, how do I remove this kind of element but keep this sort of feel about it, sort of thing, right? And
Yeah.
I think some of the OSR games have done that quite admirably, actually,
Mhm.
and others have not. To
Mhm.
just put it mildly, but yeah, there's.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting, actually, and I've mentioned this, I think, to Eddie Webb and a couple others. Is that I do always find it interesting that D&D started from a very, I would say, conservative or even right wing starting point, but its fan base has become much more progressive and liberal, and the inverse almost for a lot of World of Darkness stuff. It
Yeah.
started from a very left wing progressive space, and then a large chunk of right wing fans.
We had to discuss earlier the idea of like with Monster Kingdoms in your interview with Dixie that the fascist race or faction in a game isn't exactly like good, like it's been done to death at the moment, but you also have to think for at least from my perspective that if you do a faction that is fascistic, you're going to have to deal with the fallout of the players are going to sometimes want to play the bad guy and they're going to end up being playing fascists. And that's something you see in older Werewolf the Apocalypse has had links with some of the at least one of the tribes, I
It's
think,
the Get
to
of Fenris, and it was a
yeah.
specific camp called the Swords of Heimdall. And they were very expressly painted as bad, but still playable because WoD had that ethos of every faction is playable.
Yeah.
And then,
It can be very difficult
mm-hmm.
when someone brings that to the table
Oh
and
yeah,
you're not
and
expecting it.
exactly. And I will say, to their credit, though, they did make it so that in one of the later editions, like, that faction got killed by their own. The Get dealt with their problems. They found them all and they killed every last one of them. Fuck them fascists. And I was like,
Yeah.
good, good, good rewrite.
Yeah.
No, and I agree with that. And I think a big problem, right, is you have a problem where bad depictions of fascism are basically just comedic Nazis, which plays into a lot of fascist tropes. And
Mhm.
then the good depictions of fascism are there to make you, the GM, and even you, the player, kind of think about your own culture and what elements might be playing into that. But what
Mhm.
ends up happening is there's going to always be a subset of people who go, "That's awesome."
Yeah.
Uh,
I that can be very difficult to deal at a table,
yeah,
to be
exactly.
honest.
It can
I
be.
I and this is a topic I wanted to bring up because this tangent a little bit. So I've been playing Curseborn. You've heard from other people and I've probably seen me around talking about it.
Yeah.
The That changed. So for those who don't know, Onyx Path Publishing were, I think it's licensees of Paradox's Chronicles of Darkness setting. Paradox hasn't made any new hasn't greenlit any new Chronicles of Darkness products. So Onyx Path hasn't been making anything new for Chronicles since like I think last year. And so now they're doing Onyx Path is doing their own urban horror game called Curseborn, and it's all about family drama or family politics. And so there, I'm like delving into an entire realm of political thought that is different than nation building and factions of gangsters and things like that. You really, coming from stuff at a family perspective, you think about it and you realize, oh, these are sometimes the foundation of these political ideas. It's the I need a favor for you to do this so that this person's favor gets fulfilled and all this other stuff, and you feel a pressure sometimes that you might not feel in a more grand scenario. Like a lot of people talk about Vampire the Masquerade with the various different factions, the Camarilla, the Sabbat, Anarchs, and stuff like that, as well as the Antediluvians. But the stories I hear from players of their favorite times playing that game are when they have to deal with their sire, when they have to deal with the fact that they're trying to hide that they're interacting with their human family and stuff like that. And so you have this family politics that I don't think a lot of people think of too much anymore when it comes to games.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't see it much in when I played Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure. I think now Dungeons and Dragons did it once, and it was pretty cool. But that was in second edition at that point. That was Birthright, I think. That was a lot of family drama. But no, I agree with that. I think I think what I like about Curseborn, right, is that you do have the family politics overlapping kind of the real the outside world politics, because those families, you have to deal with it internally and then project a certain face to other families, other factions, other creatures, which creates this very interesting tangled web that allows you to really generate a lot of story potential. I would say infinite story potential, but probably a good number for your own personal comfort.
Have you? It it definitely, when it comes to a family story, you definitely feel that hook into it that I feel you might not get from something where you're like dealing with a prince who's been the prince of the city for 1,000 years or something, or 100 years or something.
Yeah.
I One of my favorite villains I ran, and I share this story whenever I can. I don't know if it's out in podcast form, but I had a player who the antagonist was their sire, but their sire was basically like uh uh what is it when a kid celebrity has their mom is like a it's like a I forget what they call that. I don't want to use one term because that one term doesn't really hold up anymore. But it's like you have that like dance mom, the one that
Yeah,
pushes your
yeah,
child
yeah.
to do better. So the mother was manufacturing crises in the city so that her child would go and fix them. And
Oh.
so when the child found out this was happening, she confronted that he confronted her and was like, I need you to stop doing this. You're putting people in danger. And she's like, well, if I throw a monster at the prince and you save the prince, you get promoted. If you don't save the prince, you might be next in line to be the next prince.
I love
and
that.
and the player had the option to kill her right there. Like he could have killed her and he didn't because she had supported him. She
Mm-hmm.
believed that he could be the best
Yes.
possible thing. And it's like you get into these family dramas and you're like suddenly you're like, "Oh, what what is it like to have a villain in your life that you can't punch, that you can't take out because they are family?"
That actually reminds me of my werewolf game where the Elder, the Sept, they all loved him because he was very kind to them, child of Gaia. But he kind of was screwing over one of the other tribes because the Karen used to be theirs. But he's trying to go, we're going to just let everyone in. And so he's like not giving them the political positions that they want and things like that. But he's so kind to them and he's helped them out so much that they're blind to it for months and months and months, actually probably a year and a half of game time. And then when it
Mm.
became essentially unignorable, when one of the others went, what the fuck are you doing? This is what he's doing to us. You've been taking his side every time. They tried to come at him with kid gloves at first. Like,
Yeah.
they tried to soft pot, and they just kind of came to the conclusion that until he faced consequences, he wasn't going to change. And so they had to figure out good consequences that wouldn't end up with him being a corpse because they still liked him and loved him essentially.
Yeah, you when you have a likable villain, it is heartbreaking and you get accused of emotional torture sometimes.
I have referred to myself and have been referred to by my players as a sadist. Uh,
Yeah. It can be. I mean, I think as a GM, we have to be masochists often because we
yeah,
have to enjoy seeing our players defeat our our
yes,
characters.
true, true. Um, no, that's very true. But no, I do like the Curseborn one. I'm actually interested because I imagine an open city game for Chronicles allowed you a little bit of freedom, just because at that point it's so you have a large table that a lot of the political and factional play kind of generates itself, right?
Oh yeah, it was we had players, so a lot of the alliances got made because players were interacting with each other. They would have games together and be like, "Hey, this person's a really fun person to play with. I really like their character. Our character should have a friendship." And it was a few of us. There was the vampire player, a mage player, and me. I was a werewolf player in it because it was a West Marches, I didn't have to be the GM all the time, so I could swap out with another GM. But we had sessions that we would do where we were just having fun in the city. Like we weren't doing a mission. We were just hanging out and like enjoying each other's company, going to nightclubs, feeding for the vampire and for the werewolf sometimes. And it was kind of like a slice of life session, and those really highlight the low points for the rest of the campaign because you have these high points of joy, and then it can only go downhill from there.
Yeah, no, I've run and I do really like trying to pepper in the occasional slice of life session because it um because as we were talking about like with these grand factions in like vampire or even werewolf where like in my game the apocalypse is coming, like
Mm-hmm.
nukes have gone off in the United States like in 7 points, the economy's crashing, right? All this stuff. But you have these moments of the characters sitting down with their favorite NPCs and trying to either survive or just enjoy each other's company. I had one where years ago, my last Werewolf Chronicle, uh, they were getting ready, like things were starting to go down, and they ended up going to a bar with their like three favorite NPCs, and they just drank and talked shop and like were reminiscing and just talking about hopes and dreams and things like that, which really grounded them for kind of the intrigue and the stuff to come.
I get that. That really helps build a game. And as a GM, I have to tell myself that those are really good moments to have because from my perspective, a session that's just talking sometimes is very dull to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I do like making a story, but sometimes it's like, oh, we haven't had combat or we haven't had some intrigue in a while. We just have had like discussing how to refurnish a house. But then I've talked to players after sessions that were just like that, and they were like, "That was the best session we had so far." And I'm like, "Oh, so killing the giant troll or whatever didn't wasn't as fun as going on a shopping a shopping interlude scene."
Right. I did a. We got real cards and we played poker in character in a Wild West werewolf
Mm.
game for like 2 hours. And it was back and forth innuendos of like a guy from the Stolen Moon, the Waxing Moon Society basically going, I know you're werewolves, and them insinuating, we know you know we're werewolves, and they're just back and forth, anteing up, and things like that, like for 2 hours. It was incredible. It was one of the most memorable gaming moments of my life, and it was just talking and playing poker without a single die being rolled.
Oh, that's crazy. I get when we have social systems in games, I'm so much in favor of not rolling dice for social situations a lot of the time. Because if
Yeah.
you have so some players, yeah, they're not as charismatic as their character will say, but like still they can get across the ideas and we can workshop them out. But if ever they have trouble finding the words, we can always lean on the dice rolls. We can always say, okay, what you just said there, that persuasive argument, um, roll like you know what you want the end state of this conversation to be, roll it out. But oftentimes, like I just find a player's like, hey, let's negotiate for a favor. And we role play it out, and I don't feel like I should ever have to make them roll a die for that
Yeah, I
sometimes.
think I think the only time I do that is if I still think there's a chance of failure. Like
Oh
if
yeah.
the person's super staunchly against it at the beginning, even if it's a really great argument, and I might reduce the difficulty or something like that, or make it an easier roll. But if there's always a chance of failure and the failure is interesting, then I do the roll, the standard, GM stuff. But I agree, if there's a good role playing moment and it is narratively satisfying,
Oh
that
yeah.
the discussion is how that ends, then I'm 100% in your corner about that one.
And I've I've said before, like I definitely feel the stories we can tell with role playing games are so different than reading a book, like being and being and playing a video game with like choose your own adventure stuff, because you're actually making the decision and someone is improving back to you what the reactions would be, so you can get into situations you'd never expect.
Are you familiar with the game White Hack?
No, I am not.
Okay, it's a fantasy RPG. It is. I like the ideas behind it, but it has an ethos I really like and I've brought to other games specifically, and it is role playing games at the end of the day is a conversation. You might roll
Mm.
dice to see where the conversation goes next based on the rules in the book, but at the end of the day, we are having a conversation of where the story is going, and if you treat it that way, you're going to find it branching off in ways that are more satisfying.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and it treats its spells that way. So it uses D&D like spells, but it has no stats for the spells. It is you have the description of your character, and
Mhm.
so like if you describe yourself as a wizard, wizened wizard, long beard, things like that, everyone has an idea in the conversation of the game what that light spell will look like and do, versus
Mhm.
an elven cleric when they cast light, that spell might look and act differently based on the description and the conversation of what that character is. And you
Mm.
kind of create that on the fly. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah. So many good games out there and so little time to play them.
I'm dying, man.
I am yeah, it's like I'm I had my West Marches game and I had set up like so many plot hooks and things like that, and it sadly died out after a bit. But I'm trying to build up some semblance of that with Curseborn at the moment.
Yeah.
I have interlocking games with people both in stream and not on stream,
Okay.
and it's all in a shared universe, and I try and keep it as interconnected as possible. But you always end up with a situation where someone decides to blow up a building, and you're like, okay, the other players were in that building currently, so
Canonish. Uh,
canonish. But I mean, like simulating politics in these games is just such a interesting way to deal with problem solving. Like trying
yeah.
to figure out, trying to understand other people in reality. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's helped me to an extent understand different politicking techniques, debate techniques, ways of manipulating situations, and that sounded sinister, but not like but like even in like the current political climate, it isn't, you can take aspects of how someone talked about even a mundane subject, like it could be the smallest news story out in the world at the moment, but you could learn something from it, like in the rhetoric right now for a orange politician, it doesn't matter what reality is, it just matters to if you can shout over the reality, and
Yeah.
then you create your own fiction. So you can take that idea and put it into a vampire prince or a werewolf pack leader who is say you show evidence and he suddenly is getting very offensive, saying you can't prove that evidence is actually real. And then it doesn't matter if you can, because suddenly that idea is in his followers or her followers or their
Mm-hmm.
followers, and you have to now compete at, in my head I would be like, oh, that's a higher difficulty check now
Yeah.
because this leader is trying to immunize
Immunize, I
their
think.
yeah their their followers against ideas that don't work for their ideology.
Yeah, and um, I've noticed more of these starting to happen in like the world below and things like that, and I hope they still exist. And it sounds like they still exist in Monster Kingdoms, but I do find this would have been even helpful in, I would say, Vampire the Masquerade and other World of Darkness and Chronicle Darkness games is random tables on political outcomes,
Mm.
because the problem is at least my problem is even when I decide someone would act irrational to something, there is a rationality to
Mm.
that irrationality, and that is not necessarily how some people react or how political situations go.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
There's sometimes some things just come out of left field and are irrational, and I think that's where random tables come in, because you roll on that, and that gives you the inspiration of how to be irrational, or make a rational choice based on what came out on the table. And I think that creates an extra spark and enjoyment for me as a GM, because now I'm discovering what how the political situation is evolving, right?
Yeah. Have you checked out Worlds Without Number, I think?
Yes, yes, I have.
Their system for running factions was quite interesting for me, and I kind of almost turned it into a solo game for myself at one
Okay.
point. Because you were for the audience, you have like you can create factions on a planet and give them like different abilities and things like that and goals, and then like you do like a turn by turn uh story of how the timeline progresses, and some factions could go to war with each other, other factions could not. It's still a bit of a simulationist system. It's quite complex from when I tried it in the day, but I've tried simplifying it for other games, and I'm still trying to do that in my own way.
Yeah, I get that. No, for sure. I know we're coming up on time, so are there any kind of like closing thoughts you'd like to impart to the audience on your ideas on politics and games, whether they're real world politics working their way into your games or running political games more generally?
I think it's definitely, don't be afraid of adding politics to your game. If it's politics are in our lives every day, even not really, not the real politics that you might see in the news. You have office politics, you have friendship politics, you have family politics, you have all these dynamics that you're balancing. You are allocating time to specific people in your life. You are trying to gauge what favors to do when, who to interact with. And those all have consequences and upsides. So just like look around to the world and like get like realize that the politics of life sort of like add flavor to it. It adds the tension to your day. It adds the the spice of life a little bit. It's I would say a great example just to end off with is you if you're watching a soap opera or a telenovela, you're staying there for the drama, and the drama is from like family politics and stuff like that. So definitely like go out of your comfort zone, look at things just a little bit differently, and maybe you'll find something that will surprise your players and get them more into political intrigue or investigation or any of those other wonderful social based things that aren't just fighting someone in a white room with a sword.
Agreed. And Corbin, where can you be found online if you so choose to wish to be found?
Oh, I've never wished to be found. No, I do wish to be found. You can find me at the at the Awkward GM Corbin on YouTube, and I do stream on Onyx Path Publishing's Twitch channel on Sundays at 8 p.m. currently for a game I call Accursed in Boston, which is a Curseborn based actual play.
Wonderful. Well, I've been Keegan. This is A Bunch of Gamers. You can find us on YouTube, Podbean, Listen Notes, and a bunch of other places. You can find us on Facebook, Blue Sky, but you'll never find me on Twitter. I founded a cesspool, and I was proven right.